June 5th, 2014. It's a bright summer morning in Detroit, Michigan, a Rust Belt city that's hustling to pull itself up by the bootstraps.
Detroit is a grinding, a hard-working city. You come here, you're going to love and have a passion for the city.
I'm proud to say I'm from Detroit, and I'd never plan on leaving, honestly.
The morning marks a significant milestone for one Detroit family. Alicia Fox's daughter, Kayla, is graduating kindergarten.
Alicia was extremely excited, so excited that she bought Kayla a custom cap and gown.
It should have been one of the best days ever.
But as the ceremony is about to begin, Kayla's teacher realizes something is wrong.
I'm standing, getting the kindergartners up to go to the stage. And we get to the last student, and I realize Kayla wasn't in line.
Her mother is missing too.
I did a 360 and looked through the audience, and Alicia was not present.
Alicia's husband, Aaron Justice, and their 8-month-old son was absent as well.
The only family member in the crowd is Kayla's father.
Hey, have you seen Alicia or Kayla anywhere?
Kayla's dad was just as puzzled as her teacher.
I've been calling her phone all day, but it's been going straight to voicemail.
It's so weird. She was so excited about this. She wouldn't miss this.
Unable to reach Alicia, he tries her sister.
Kayla's dad called me saying, "Where's Alicia? Where's Kayla?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "They didn't show up to the graduation." She talked about it all of the time.
At this point, they're starting to be concerned.
There was no way that Alicia was going to miss Kayla's graduation.
Something wasn't right.
"27-year-old Alicia Fox had spent her whole life in the city of Detroit.
We grew up on the east side of Detroit. My mom raised us all. It was 3 girls and 3 boys. And Alicia was like the second mom because, you know, she was the oldest.
Alicia was always the one to protect her loved ones. I just remember her being a sweetheart.
Alicia was versatile. She could tell a joke. She, make people laugh. She would cook and plan family events. She was a backbone to, someone who needed support.
Although by 20 years old, Alicia was busy supporting a family of her own.
After graduating high school, Alicia got very close with a male friend that she grew up with.
They met, I believe it was elementary school. His mom says that she knew that they were gonna grow up and sparks were gonna fly.
They ended up falling in love, and they ended up having a daughter.
I don't think that Kayla was planned, but when they found out about her, they both were equally excited. She was very proud to be a mother. Her entire life became Kayla.
They were best friends. Like, you never really saw Alicia without Kayla.
Alicia and Kayla's father soon went their separate ways, though.
There was like a mutual understanding.
Co-parenting seemed real easy. They got along well, and I just never seen any issues or problems.
Everything they did was in the best interest of Kayla. They communicated with each other. They were able to come together whenever they needed to for Kayla.
Before long, there would be another man in Alicia and Kayla's lives, Aaron Justice.
Alicia and Aaron started dating in 2012.
Oh my gosh, thank you. We're starving.
I gotta take care of my girls.
Much like Kayla's father before him, Alicia had known Aaron for a long time.
They knew each other since Alicia was a teenager. They had a mutual group of friends, so he was always around.
Even though she wasn't trying to be in a relationship, he was smooth, he was suave, and they ended up getting together.
Aaron was very chivalrous. He was pretty much a sweetheart to Alicia.
He also had her back.
He came into Alicia's life and he encouraged Alicia to go back to school to be a medical assistant.
I vividly remember he would make promises to her and she would be like, well, don't flake on me, don't say it if you're not gonna do it. And he'd be like, I promise, Scout's honor.
Aaron kept his promise too, helping take care of Kayla while Alicia went back to school.
You sure you don't mind?
Of course, baby. Let's go. You gotta ace that test.
He and Kayla did have a pretty good relationship, playing around, watching TV, playing games. And Kayla, was cool hanging around him, having him there.
Aaron was so good with Kayla. He was exactly what Alicia had been looking for. So she could see herself spending the rest of her life with him.
And as Alicia was finishing her medical assistant certification, she gave birth to the couple's son, Christian.
She was extremely excited. She wanted more kids, and she wanted a boy.
Erin was just as excited as Alicia.
And for Alicia, it looked like she'd really hit the jackpot.
After Alicia had Christian, they got married. They moved into a bigger house.
Everything happened very fast, but I was just happy that she was happy. I love seeing her happy.
Things seemed like they were on the up and up.
But now, on the day of Kayla's kindergarten graduation, the entire family is a no-show.
Alicia had been working hard for weeks to make this moment special. It made no sense.
There was just too much invested in it. She wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Concerned, Alicia's family desperately tries to reach her.
I called her phone, texted her, called Aaron's phone, texted him. I didn't get through to anybody.
Alicia's sister called other family and friends too, but they hadn't heard from Alicia either.
By the end of the night, I was worried enough to start calling hospitals. I couldn't sleep at all.
The next morning, Alicia's sister and several family members decide to go over to her house.
Alicia!
Alicia, you here?
There was no answer to their knocks, and there was no car in the driveway.
Someone discovered a window was unlocked, so they climbed in and opened the door.
But inside, they find nothing.
All of their stuff was gone.
Everyone thought Alicia Fox had found her fairy tale ending when she fell for 28-year-old Aaron Justice.
I do remember her being really, really happy.
They moved into a bigger house and they got married. So I thought everything was well.
But now, after Alicia missed her daughter's kindergarten graduation, relatives have found her house empty and abandoned.
We all get that feeling where it's like something's not right. That was pretty much the feeling that I had.
It wouldn't have been like Alicia to just pack up her things and the kids' things and just leave without telling her family.
Wherever they were, it doesn't appear that they left in a hurry.
The house was spotless. You would have assumed that it was professionally cleaned.
The whole house smelled like bleach.
And when she searches the basement, Alicia's sister finds a stash of empty bleach containers.
Which raised the red flag, because it's like, why so much bleach?
Was the empty house also a crime scene? Fearing the worst, Alicia's sister goes straight to the police.
I made a missing persons report for everyone. And then Kayla's dad made a separate report on behalf of Kayla.
Alicia's family tells the police officers the last time they saw Alicia was at Memorial Day. She was her normal, bubbly self, and she didn't say anything about moving out of town.
Once Alicia's sister files the report, officers accompany her back to the house.
Of course, they didn't see anything indicative of foul play.
The house was bare. That might lead one to believe the whole family moved, and they just didn't tell anybody.
That's essentially what one neighbor tells the police, as they're leaving the empty house.
He walked over and says, "Oh, they just moved."
Well, there was a moving van out here a while ago.
Maybe Aaron and Alicia got into some financial situation, and they can no longer afford the rent here.
If it was due to money troubles, maybe they were too embarrassed to tell anyone.
The family doesn't think so.
That doesn't make any sense.
They're an extremely close-knit family. So for Alicia not to ask for help with the move or at least share the news just didn't seem like her.
But at this point, the police are hesitant to launch a full-scale search.
They gave me a report number, pretty much told me, wait to see if you hear from her, you know.
That's it?
That's it. Have a good day.
Many adults leave. They're grown. They can leave on their own. They can come back when they want to.
Unsatisfied, Alicia's family sets out to find their loved ones on their own.
We pretty much started doing our own investigating.
Starting with her sister's social media posts.
On Alicia's social media, a lot of the posts were trying to portray that she was taking the kids to Cedar Point instead of going to Kayla's graduation.
Cedar Point is an amusement park that is 2 hours away.
This is not making any sense.
She had never said anything about skipping the graduation.
Kayla, she's barely tall enough to ride rides. Why would she skip out on this graduation to go to Cedar Point?
There was nothing in Alicia's social media about moving out of their house either.
Something seemed off.
The contents of the posts aren't all that's off either.
The verbiage is different in these posts. She doesn't talk like this. She doesn't use this kind of punctuation.
For Alicia's sister, the implications are clear.
And she does not type like this, no.
Someone else had made the posts.
Why would someone pose as Alicia?
More worried than ever that something horrible has happened, Alicia's sister and her family reach back out to the police.
I'm telling you, she did not post this stuff.
Police ask, is there anyone that would want to do harm to Alicia?
It's a question the family has a hard time answering.
Alicia didn't have enemies.
The only person they could possibly think of was her ex.
Kayla's father?
No, it was a man between him and her husband.
According to Alicia Fox's family, the missing mother of two had a complicated history with her ex-boyfriend, a man named Nick Barnes.
Alicia and Nick's relationship wasn't the best.
They were young, and he made some decisions, that were detrimental to their relationship.
He was a drug dealer, somewhat unsavory character.
In addition to his past relationship with Alicia, Nick also had a history with Alicia's husband, Aaron.
He was not only Alicia's ex, he was Aaron's former best friend.
But that had changed after Nick's drug dealing landed him in jail.
While he was on the inside, Nick asked Aaron to check up on Alicia.
That's when he stepped in and became that supportive friend, trying to help her.
He tried to be a comforting shoulder to Alicia.
Although it wasn't long before Aaron was doing more than just comforting Alicia.
He and Alicia hit it off, and they ended up together.
The family was real happy about their relationship.
I do remember feeling happy that she moved on from being with Nick.
However, when Nick got out of jail, he wasn't as happy about how things had worked out.
He was furious with both Aaron and Alicia. I mean, his friend is now dating his ex-girlfriend.
He regularly let them know how he felt about what he considered their betrayal.
Nick had a history of harassing them. It was so bad that Aaron and Alicia had to move across town. Is this enough to say Nick is the reason the family has disappeared?
Alicia's friends and family aren't so sure.
I would have never thought that he found out where she stayed and then did something to them or anything like that. Because he did love her. You could tell that he loved her, for sure.
But with the whole family missing, detectives aren't so quick to rule it out.
Nick's criminal past raised a lot of red flags.
There was enough information there to make them think possibly he was involved. He's an ex-boyfriend. He's got a criminal past. He had jealousy and resentment for the relationship that Alicia and Aaron had. So Nick had to be looked at as a possible suspect.
But when detectives reach out, Nick isn't interested in talking.
Hello? This is homicide detective. I want you to come down to the station to answer some questions about the disappearance of Alicia Fox.
Look, if you want to talk to me, call my lawyer.
Nick has dealt with the police before. He's done time, so he knew how the game was played.
Which only leaves detectives more suspicious.
Once you are able to talk to that person and you find out they're not cooperative, you would see what other information you could find out.
While detectives dig deeper into Nick, the family's frustration grows, and they decide to launch their own effort to find Alicia and the others.
We'd hit the ground running.
Alicia's family is in the streets trying to figure out, does anybody have an idea what happened to Alicia and her family?
We had a couple people call and say, oh, I think I saw her. She was walking the baby in a stroller. So we go over there, we're searching, pretty much excited. We did find the girl who actually resembled Alicia, but wasn't her.
Then, on June 9th, 4 days after Kayla's kindergarten graduation, the family receives an anonymous tip.
The tipster tells them he got the number from this flyer that was posted around the city, and they should go check out this abandoned home on the west side of Detroit.
The tipster provided an address, but no other details.
Alicia's family races to the abandoned house.
We called the police, but we beat them there.
At that point, they weren't about to wait.
We pulled the boards off the house.
Despite the boards, the abandoned house shows signs of activity.
You could tell that, probably squatters had been in the house.
Alicia!
Kayla!
As they approached the basement stairs, Alicia's uncle held everybody else back.
Stay right here.
There was this really eerie feeling.
While the rest of the family waits upstairs, Alicia's uncle descends into the basement.
I remember my uncle just yelling up the stairs, there's something down here. We ran downstairs.
He found an old door lying on top of something wrapped in a tarp.
He lifted the door up and pulled the tarp back.
There is a dead body in the basement.
Alicia Fox's loved ones have spent 4 anxious days combing the streets of Detroit for the missing mother, her husband Aaron, and their 2 children. But now an anonymous tip has brought their frantic search to a devastating end.
The family went to an abandoned house and found a body in the basement.
It was Alicia. I knew that it was her. She had on her favorite purple basketball shorts.
At that point, it was too late. Everyone knew that Alicia was dead.
That day was just rough.
Outside the house, Alicia's uncle calls the police, while her sister contacts the father of Alicia's daughter.
I remember telling him we had found her.
He's at the abandoned house within minutes, before the police even arrive.
He ran in, because he couldn't believe it. He had to see it for himself. All I remember thinking is, right now, he's terrified about the safety of his daughter.
Police and homicide detectives get to the scene soon after.
Homicide investigators respond to the scene. Even if the cause of death is not known, it is a suspicious death.
Any sign of other kids?
No, nothing.
After speaking with the officer, detectives see what potential clues they can uncover from Alicia's remains.
A quick examination of the body confirmed that they were dealing with a homicide.
Alicia had been shot 6 times with 2 shots to the head.
However, that's not the only injury Alicia suffered.
It also appears, while trying to dispose of her body, Alicia's killer tried to sever her legs.
It was a very graphic scene.
Whoever did this to Alicia had to be a sick, deranged individual.
It's also evident to detectives that Alicia's murder had occurred well before the family reported her missing.
The body was in a state of decomposition, and it was determined that Alicia had been in the basement possibly more than 4 days.
In fact, police think she might have been killed not long after the family last saw her 2 weeks ago.
But officers don't locate any other bodies inside the house.
Where is Aaron Justice? Where are the children?
Could they still be alive?
Only one thing is certain. The family's search is far from over.
I was just trying my best to be strong for everybody, because as much as I wanted to or needed to mourn, I knew that there was still going to be a job to be done.
While the family clings to hope, the detectives have to consider a different possibility.
Maybe Aaron wasn't the victim. Maybe he was the killer.
Is that why Alicia's body was the only one in the house? Could Aaron have killed her and ran off with the kid?
Quietly, the detectives decide to do a little digging into Aaron.
They find out he has some very serious charges in his rap sheet.
Aaron had weapons possession charges and a prior domestic violence assault.
That's definitely a red flag.
That type of behavior can escalate. And the one thing about domestic abuse, it can escalate quickly, and it can go places we never wanted to go.
When the detectives follow up with her family, they all say Alicia and Aaron's marriage seemed fine.
Anytime I talked to Alicia about their relationship, it was always something positive.
For the most part, she seemed happy. I thought they were just going through the typical marriage stuff.
Or could there have been more going on than Alicia's family knew?
A lot of the times, women are hiding what happens. So to the outside world, they're thinking, hey, you guys have a perfect relationship, you look good, and they don't know what's going on behind closed doors.
The first indication of trouble comes when a friend of Aaron's reaches out to detectives.
He tells the police Aaron had confided in him that Alicia and him were fighting all the time.
He said she was talking about getting a divorce.
This could be a clear motive that he would try to harm her.
But it's what the man says next that really grabs the detective's attention.
Aaron texted him a picture of a gun and asked him, did he want to buy it?
When was that?
Last Saturday.
31st.
I guess.
That was only a few days before Alicia went missing, likely right after she had been killed.
Was Aaron trying to get rid of a murder weapon?
Detectives investigating the murder of 27-year-old Alicia Fox have learned that shortly after someone shot her 6 times, her husband, Aaron Justice, was trying to sell a .40 caliber handgun.
That would lead an investigator to wonder if the ballistics on that gun would be matched to what was found at the scene where Alicia was discovered.
To prove that it was the murder weapon, they would need to get their hands on the gun.
Did you buy the gun?
Nah, I don't get involved in that kind of stuff.
It's a disappointment for detectives, but Aaron's friend does share some other potentially valuable information.
Aaron may have been having an affair.
That might have been possibly why she wanted to divorce him.
It definitely is a betrayal of emotion, of security, of family.
She would have never wanted that going on in front of her kids.
The fact that Alicia and Aaron's marriage may have been in trouble is news to her family.
I was pretty surprised when I found out. There wasn't something where I felt like, oh, they're on the verge of getting a divorce.
I thought that she was in love and happy.
We see it a lot. It's hush-hush behind closed doors, and nobody in the family really knows how bad it is.
The suspicion surrounding Aaron only grows once the family hears rumors that he is alive and well.
According to the rumors, he was in Atlanta.
At that point, somebody in the family blurted out, he's running.
When detectives learn that Aaron may be in Atlanta, they work to track him down.
They're hopeful with finding him that the children will be with him.
They start their search by obtaining a subpoena for Aaron's cell phone records.
Almost everyone has a cell phone, and cell phone signals can be traced.
After confirming that Aaron was in Atlanta, the detectives contacted the FBI.
There was a warrant issued for Aaron's arrest.
It wasn't long for federal agents to find him and track him down and bring him into custody.
Unfortunately, when they made the arrest, there was no sign of Kayla or Christian.
With Aaron in custody, investigators waste no time getting him into an interrogation room.
I had immense hope that the police were going to be able to get a location of the children out of him.
But when questioned, Aaron has little to say.
Everybody wants to know where the kids are. I don't know where they are.
He played dumb the entire time, like he had no idea what happened to Alicia or the kids.
I got nothing to talk about. We're not talking. You should. You should have a whole lot to say. You should be telling us who you gave your kids to. I'm telling you, like a man, I don't know where they are.
Aaron not only denied knowing anything about the location of the kids, he also denied being involved in Alicia's murder.
Yeah, we know Alicia's dead. Because we found her. That's a given. You killed Alicia? No.
Aaron said that the last time he saw Alicia, she was alive and angry.
He told the officer she put me out, she asked me for a divorce.
That confirmed some of what the detectives had heard from their friends.
But they won't get confirmation on anything else.
You gonna take this to the grave? Take what to the grave? Everything. No, I don't know everything. Your guilt? You gonna take your guilt to the grave, man? I don't know guilt. I ain't know.
Investigators tried very hard, but he still didn't give up any meaningful information.
Killed your wife. I know that for sure. My biggest issue, I would like to know where that child is at.
The fact that you're still holding on to where the kids are, that is like pure evil.
You tell me where you placed them. I didn't place them nowhere. You had them last. Here we go with you. Here we go with you. I'm not the one wearing the green little jumpsuit. You are.
However, while Aaron is in custody, it's unclear if prosecutors will be able to put him away for good.
The evidence against Aaron was entirely circumstantial at this point.
With Aaron stonewalling detectives and no new leads coming in, it looks like the case may come apart. Until Alicia's sister gets an unexpected tip about a friend of Aaron's named Timothy Jones.
I got a call from someone who knew Timothy, and they told me that Timothy had been going around the neighborhood telling people that Aaron killed Alicia, and he paid him to hide the body.
As soon as she's off the phone with the informant, Alicia's sister contacts the lead detective.
I let him know what they're telling me, and within like a day or so, they had picked Timothy up.
As soon as the detective sat Tim down for questioning, he broke down.
Did a really bad thing.
Detectives investigating Alicia Fox's murder and the disappearance of her 2 children are following up on a tip that a man named Timothy Jones may be involved.
Timothy was an old friend of Aaron's.
They had reason to believe Tim may know something about what happened to Alicia. Therefore, they bring Tim in and interview him.
Tim tells police Aaron called him to come over for Memorial Day weekend and help out with something. They've been friends forever, so he didn't think much of it.
But when I got there, something just seemed off.
Aaron was really upset, and he basically admitted that he had just shot his wife.
Did he say why?
Said they got in a fight.
Aaron told him that Alicia said that she wanted a divorce.
It's over, Aaron.
Over?
Yes.
Oh, I'll show you over. So, he shot her.
Yeah, I guess. He said he blacked out.
Once he came to, he realized he was holding a gun and Alicia was dead.
Whether Aaron actually did black out or not, Tim says he has little doubt that Aaron did kill Alicia.
Because after confessing, Tim says Aaron asked him to help get rid of the evidence.
Did you?
Yeah, man, I've known him since elementary school.
Tim picked up some shell casings from the gun. He threw them in the sewer.
He says he also helped Aaron load Alicia's body into a rental truck.
That was the same truck that neighbors had seen outside of the house.
Just right over there.
After Tim helped Aaron get rid of the body, he said Aaron paid him.
He paid him Alicia's jewelry, which was a pair of Cartier glasses and a watch.
However, Tim says he doesn't know what's become of Alicia's 2 children.
He says when he left Aaron's house that day, the children were still alive.
It appears he is telling the truth.
Detectives had Tim take a polygraph test, and he passed.
Then, detectives take Tim back to the crime scene, where they recover 4 .40 caliber shell casings from the storm drain.
That was the same caliber as the gun that Aaron was trying to sell around the time of the murder.
With the evidence against him piling up, detectives are confident they can now secure a conviction against Aaron Justice. While Aaron sits in the Wayne County Jail awaiting trial, the search for Alicia's missing children continues.
We searched houses and commercial buildings and streets. We even did grid searches of forests and rivers.
Months go by with no trace of Kayla or Christian, and unfortunately, they were never found.
With no bodies and nothing but circumstantial evidence against Aaron, he was never charged with anything regarding their disappearance.
And he won't stand trial for Alicia's murder either.
When trial came and we got to court and the judge told us that he had accepted a plea deal, it was a surprise to everybody.
With Tim set to testify against him, Aaron's attorney probably saw conviction coming.
In September of 2015, Aaron Justice pleads guilty to murder.
When he took the plea deal, I don't remember him showing any kind of emotion or remorse. He was just sitting there, like he just did not care. Like something is really wrong with him. And he's just sitting there, not crying, not looking like he had any remorse for doing this. It made me want to beat the shit out of him, honestly. Just jump over the thing, grab something, and like beat him with it or something. Because it pisses me off and it makes me so angry.
In return for his plea, Aaron is sentenced to between 45 and 80 years in prison.
When most people hear that a defendant received 45 to 80 years, they think it's justice. I don't think that. I don't think that 45 to 80 years of not being able to walk in the free world I don't think it suffices for what he did.
And no amount of prison time can bring back the woman he took away.
Alicia was everything to a lot of people. She was nearly the backbone to my family. She kept a lot of us together. So much so that losing her has kind of changed the dynamic of my family. She was everybody's favorite. And I want people to remember Alicia for her energetic personality and her goofy laugh, and just that she was someone that you can always count on.
Alicia never deserved anything like this. She was just so sweet. She loved everything. And she was definitely a strong woman, for sure.
But most of all, the family wishes the prosecutors would have put one more condition on Aaron's plea deal.
It definitely should have involved him telling us where the kids are. Because, like, he takes the plea deal and then he just goes to prison. But what about the kids? And it makes me really, really angry. Because it's like they think they did their job, but really no, because you still have 2 missing children. We're out here still suffering. Like, we cannot move on.
It is just very troubling that there's a plea deal and he has information, yet it's not being shared. There should never be a plea deal until all the information is out on the table.
I definitely still have hope and faith that one day we will find the kids. But as time goes on, it gets harder and harder. The feeling of not knowing makes it 1,000 times worse, because we just don't know.
Kayla and Christian meant everything to Alicia. And if there's anybody out there who has any information that could help bring them home to the family that Alicia loved, I'm sure that it will bring Alicia some peace.
If you have any information on the disappearance of Kayla Hunter or Christian Justice, please contact Crime Stoppers of Michigan at 1-800-773-2587.
March 15, 2008. Santa Monica was settling into the kind of night that made people believe they were safe. The air carried a faint trace of salt drifting inland from the Pacific. Streetlights cast long amber reflections across quiet sidewalks. Cars rolled lazily through intersections. Laughter escaped from restaurant patios where conversations stretched past midnight. Somewhere along Ocean Avenue, waves broke against the darkness in a rhythm older than the city itself. To anyone looking from the outside, nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed dangerous. And yet, behind the walls of a modest apartment, a young woman was fighting for her life. She was 21 years old. She had dreams that still felt unfinished. Photographs from that period show a woman with bright eyes and an effortless smile, someone who appeared to belong in front of a camera. The kind of face people remembered. The kind of person who walked into a room and naturally became part of the center of attention without ever trying too hard. But on that night, none of that mattered. Beauty offered no protection. Ambition offered no protection. Hope offered no protection. What happened during those final moments remains one of the most disturbing mysteries in modern California crime history. Because unlike many murder victims, this young woman may have managed to reach for help while death was already closing in around her. According to investigators, a desperate call to 911 was placed from inside the apartment. The call connected. For a brief moment, help was only a phone line away. Then something happened. The call ended abruptly. No explanation. No final statement. No address given. No desperate scream recorded for history. Just silence. Investigators would later theorize that someone tore the phone away before she could finish. If that theory is correct, it means the final seconds of the call captured a terrifying reality. Somewhere inside that apartment, Juliana Redding knew she was in danger. She knew enough to call for help. She knew enough to try. And then the opportunity vanished. When police eventually entered the residence, they discovered evidence of a brutal attack. Blood. Signs of violence. A young woman who would never leave the apartment alive. The crime scene raised more questions than answers. At first glance, it looked like the kind of homicide detectives encounter all too often: a young victim, an apparently personal attack, and a circle of friends, acquaintances, and relationships that would need to be examined one by one. But this case refused to stay simple. The deeper investigators dug, the stranger the story became. The path did not lead to a jealous lover. It did not lead to an obsessed fan. It did not lead to a random predator wandering through Santa Monica looking for an opportunity. Instead, detectives found themselves pulled into a maze of business disputes, allegations of intimidation, hidden financial conflicts, and people whose names seemed completely disconnected from the glamorous world Juliana inhabited. What began as a homicide investigation slowly transformed into something else. Something larger. Something murkier. Years would pass before prosecutors finally unveiled their theory. According to that theory, Juliana Redding was never supposed to become the center of a deadly confrontation. She was, prosecutors claimed, connected to a conflict that had little to do with her personally. A conflict involving money, power, influence, and men whose disagreements had allegedly escalated far beyond the boundaries of business. If prosecutors were correct, Juliana became a target because of a dispute that originated elsewhere. A young woman caught in the shadows of other people's battles. But proving such a theory would become another matter entirely. Because even when arrests were eventually made, even when forensic evidence appeared to point investigators toward a suspect, the most important question remained unanswered. Could anyone prove what truly happened inside that apartment? Could anyone explain exactly who was there? Exactly when they were there? And exactly how a promising young woman ended up dead? The uncertainty would become the defining characteristic of the entire case. Some murders leave investigators with no suspects. Others leave them with too many. This case left something arguably worse. It left them with evidence that seemed powerful enough to solve the crime, and uncertainty powerful enough to prevent a conviction. Years later, people would still debate the same questions. How could DNA appear in so many places yet fail to convince a jury? How could prosecutors construct an entire narrative around a murder and still fail to prove it beyond reasonable doubt? And if the accused was not responsible, then who was? Those questions continue to linger, because the death of Juliana Redding occupies a strange place in the landscape of true crime. It is not an unsolved mystery in the traditional sense. Police investigated. Suspects were identified. Arrests were made. Courtrooms heard testimony. Evidence was presented. Arguments were made. A jury reached its verdict. Yet somehow, after all of that, uncertainty remained. The story never reached the kind of ending people expect. There was no dramatic confession. No undeniable piece of evidence that erased all doubt. No final revelation tying every loose thread together. Instead, there was a lingering sense that somewhere between the crime scene and the courtroom, part of the truth disappeared. And perhaps that is what makes the case so haunting. Not simply the violence. Not simply the loss. But the possibility that the complete story remains hidden. Imagine, for a moment, the final hours before everything changed. A young woman living in Santa Monica. A city built on dreams. A city where aspiring actors, models, musicians, and artists arrive every year believing success is just around the corner. The streets are filled with possibility. Every coffee shop contains somebody chasing a future. Every apartment contains a story still being written. Juliana Redding was one of those stories. She had moved west in pursuit of opportunity. She was building connections. Building a career. Building a life. Like countless others before her, she believed tomorrow might bring something bigger. A new audition. A new project. A new chance. The future stretched ahead of her. Then, in a matter of minutes, everything stopped. The contrast is impossible to ignore. One day she was planning the next chapter of her life. The next day investigators were photographing a homicide scene. Family members who had expected phone calls instead received devastating news. Friends who had shared ordinary conversations suddenly found themselves speaking to detectives. Dreams that once seemed limitless were reduced to memories. And somewhere inside the investigation, another tragedy emerged. Because the people left behind were forced to confront not only loss, but uncertainty. Loss eventually becomes part of grief. Uncertainty does not. Uncertainty lingers. It waits. It returns unexpectedly years later. It whispers questions with no answers. What really happened? Who was responsible? Could it have been prevented? Did Juliana know why she was being attacked? Did she recognize the person confronting her? What thoughts crossed her mind when she reached for the phone? What did she hope would happen before the call was cut short? Those questions have survived far longer than the crime itself. They remain alive, because the events of March 2008 never settled neatly into a single explanation. Instead, they fractured into competing narratives. One side saw a calculated act connected to a wider conspiracy. The other saw assumptions built upon circumstantial interpretations. One side believed the evidence spoke clearly. The other believed it left too many gaps. Caught between those positions was a young woman who never had the chance to tell her own story. And that is where our journey begins. Not in a courtroom. Not with an arrest. Not with a verdict. But inside a quiet Santa Monica night, when the ocean continued moving, traffic lights continued changing, and thousands of people slept peacefully, unaware that a crime was unfolding that would remain controversial for decades. A crime that transformed a rising young actress and model into the center of one of California's most debated homicide cases. A crime that began with violence, expanded into allegations of intimidation and power, and ended with a question that still refuses to disappear. Who killed Juliana Redding? And why? Before the headlines, before the courtroom arguments, before investigators spent years trying to untangle one of California's most controversial homicide cases, there was a place. A place built on illusion. A place where thousands of young men and women arrived every year carrying photographs, portfolios, and impossible dreams. Southern California has always sold a promise to the world. It is a promise whispered through movie screens, magazine covers, and television commercials. A promise that says success is waiting just around the corner. That somewhere beneath the palm trees and endless sunshine, a different life is possible. For many people, Hollywood is not simply a location. It is an idea. An idea powerful enough to convince people to leave behind familiar towns, supportive families, and stable lives in pursuit of something uncertain. Most never become stars. Most never achieve the dreams that brought them there. But every year, they come anyway. Because hope can be stronger than logic. And in the early 2000s, few places embodied that hope more vividly than Santa Monica. Situated along the edge of the Pacific Ocean, Santa Monica offered a version of California that seemed almost too perfect to be real. The beaches stretched for miles beneath bright blue skies. Joggers moved along oceanfront paths. Expensive cars rolled past cafes crowded with aspiring actors discussing auditions and screenplays. On the surface, it was beautiful. Almost idyllic. Tourists arrived expecting postcards. Residents enjoyed sunsets that looked like paintings. Yet beneath that beauty existed another reality. Competition. Pressure. Financial uncertainty. Dreams colliding against one another every day. For every actor landing a role, hundreds heard nothing. For every model signing a contract, dozens struggled to pay rent. People learned quickly that success in Southern California often depended on timing, connections, and luck as much as talent. The city could make someone feel invincible one day and invisible the next. It was into this world that a young woman named Juliana Redding was building her future. But to understand the tragedy that would eventually consume her story, it is important first to understand the world surrounding her. The year was 2008. America stood at the edge of a financial crisis that most people had not yet fully recognized. Housing markets were beginning to crack. Economic uncertainty was quietly spreading beneath the surface. Yet in places like Santa Monica, life often appeared untouched by larger problems. Luxury restaurants remained crowded. Nightclubs remained busy. Entertainment executives continued searching for the next big star. Young dreamers continued arriving from every corner of the country. Many came with little more than ambition. Juliana was one of them. Like countless aspiring performers before her, she had traveled west with a vision of what her life could become. Arizona, where she spent much of her early life, felt very different from coastal California. Arizona offered open skies, desert landscapes, and a slower rhythm of life. California offered possibility. The distance between those two places was measured in more than miles. It was measured in expectations. In Arizona, people knew who you were. In Hollywood, people cared who you might become. That distinction matters. Because ambition often thrives in uncertainty. People chasing dreams rarely focus on obstacles. They focus on potential. And during the years leading up to her death, Juliana appeared determined to transform potential into reality. The entertainment industry can be difficult to understand from the outside. Most people see only the finished product. The movie, the magazine cover, the television appearance. What they rarely see are the countless hours spent attending auditions, networking events, promotional shoots, and meetings that may ultimately lead nowhere. For aspiring actors and models, progress often happens in small increments. A new contact, a minor role, a photo shoot, a favorable mention. Each opportunity feels like a step toward something larger. Juliana was navigating that world. Friends and acquaintances described someone who was outgoing, energetic, and socially connected. The type of person who could move comfortably through different groups of people. The type of person who remembered names. Who maintained friendships. Who seemed genuinely excited about the future. In photographs from that period, her smile appears effortless. There is confidence there. Not arrogance. Confidence. The confidence of someone who believed life was opening rather than closing. That belief would eventually make the outcome even more heartbreaking. Because tragedy often feels most cruel when it interrupts momentum. When it strikes someone who appears to be moving forward. Santa Monica became the backdrop for that momentum. The city itself almost functioned like a character in the story. During the day, sunlight reflected off storefront windows and ocean waves. Tourists crowded the famous pier. Cyclists traveled along beach paths. Street performers entertained passing crowds. At night, the atmosphere changed. The air cooled. Traffic softened. The ocean became a dark horizon beyond the city lights. Restaurants filled with conversations about careers and relationships. Young professionals met for drinks after work. Actors discussed auditions. Models attended promotional events. Everyone seemed to be chasing something. Everyone seemed to be moving. For someone building a career in entertainment, the environment could feel electric. Opportunity appeared everywhere. A chance meeting at a cafe. A conversation at a party. An introduction through a friend. Lives could change unexpectedly. Or so people believed. Juliana lived within that ecosystem. Her life was not one of extraordinary fame. Not yet. She was known within certain circles, recognized by people familiar with modeling competitions and entertainment events, but she was still in the process of creating her future. Perhaps that made her story relatable. She represented thousands of young people pursuing goals that remained just beyond reach. She had not arrived at the finish line. She was still running toward it. And that is where the atmosphere surrounding this case becomes important. Because when people hear about high-profile crimes involving entertainers, they often imagine glamour. The reality is usually far more ordinary. Most aspiring actors and models live relatively normal lives. They pay bills. They worry about work. They make plans with friends. They call family members. They celebrate small victories. They experience disappointment. Juliana's life appears to have contained many of those ordinary elements. Which makes the violence that followed feel even more shocking. At the time, nobody around her could have imagined the story that would eventually unfold. Nobody could have predicted that investigators would spend years examining business disputes, financial conflicts, and alleged intimidation networks. Nobody could have predicted that federal investigators would become involved. Nobody could have predicted that lawyers would later argue over forensic evidence in a courtroom, while the public debated whether justice had truly been served. In March of 2008, all of that still belonged to the future. The world remained unaware. The city remained unaware. Friends remained unaware. Even Juliana herself, could not have known what was approaching. That is often the most unsettling aspect of true crime. Life rarely announces the moment everything changes. There is no warning siren. No dramatic signal. People wake up believing they are living an ordinary day. Only later does that day become history. As March progressed, Santa Monica continued operating according to its usual rhythms. Morning traffic flowed toward Los Angeles. Evening crowds gathered along the coast. The entertainment industry continued moving at its relentless pace. And somewhere among those routines, invisible tensions may already have been forming. Tensions investigators would only discover later. According to theories eventually presented by prosecutors, forces were already moving behind the scenes. Conflicts were allegedly developing far beyond Juliana's immediate world. Business disagreements. Financial disputes. Relationships deteriorating under pressure. The details would not emerge until years later. At the time, they remained hidden. Like storm clouds forming beyond the horizon. From a distance, the sky still looked clear. Yet beneath the surface, circumstances were shifting. The significance of those circumstances would eventually become one of the central mysteries of the case. Was Juliana deliberately targeted? Was she connected to events she barely understood? Did she know she had become entangled in a conflict larger than herself? Or was she simply in the wrong place when hidden tensions finally exploded into violence? Those questions would haunt investigators for years. But in the beginning, there was only a city. A young woman. And a future that appeared bright. The ocean continued rising and falling against the California shoreline. Palm trees swayed above crowded streets. Dreamers continued arriving with suitcases and ambitions. Nothing about the landscape suggested that one of the state's most debated homicide cases was quietly approaching. Yet the stage was already set. The location had been chosen. The players were already present. The hidden conflicts were beginning to take shape. And somewhere within the vibrant energy of Santa Monica, beneath the sunshine, beneath the promise of Hollywood, beneath the illusion that tomorrow would look exactly like today, a tragedy was moving closer with every passing hour. The people living through those days could not see it. The city could not see it. Juliana could not see it. But history was already moving toward a night that would transform a young woman's dream into a mystery that remains unresolved in the minds of many even now. And before that mystery could begin, before investigators could search for answers, before courtrooms could debate evidence, there was one story that mattered more than all the others. The story of Juliana herself. The young woman at the center of everything. The person behind the headlines. The life that existed before the crime. Long before detectives photographed a crime scene. Long before lawyers argued over forensic evidence. Long before reporters turned her name into headlines, Juliana Redding was simply a young woman trying to build a future. That is the part of stories like this that often gets lost. The victim becomes a case file. A photograph. A date of birth followed by a date of death. A person gradually transformed into evidence. But before tragedy entered her life, Juliana had dreams, routines, insecurities, friendships, ambitions, and plans that stretched far beyond the year 2008. She was born in 1986, part of a generation that grew up during a period of rapid change in America. The internet was beginning to reshape communication. Reality television was becoming a cultural phenomenon. Celebrity culture was expanding at an unprecedented rate. Young people watched ordinary individuals become famous seemingly overnight. Hollywood no longer felt unreachable. For many, success appeared closer than ever. Like countless children, Juliana grew up imagining possibilities. The details of her childhood never became the focus of public attention, but those who knew her described a personality that naturally drew people in. She possessed an outgoing energy that made conversations easy. People remembered her smile. They remembered her enthusiasm. Some individuals command attention through force. Others do so through warmth. Juliana belonged to the second category. The people who crossed paths with her often spoke about her friendliness before mentioning anything else. As she grew older, her appearance opened doors. She was undeniably photogenic. The camera seemed to favor her. Certain faces possess a quality that photographers immediately recognize. Features align naturally. Expressions feel effortless. Images appear alive rather than posed. Juliana had that quality. Yet physical beauty alone rarely sustains a career. The entertainment world is filled with attractive people. What separates one person from another is often determination. The willingness to endure rejection. The willingness to keep moving forward despite uncertainty. At some point during her young adulthood, Juliana made the same decision made by thousands before her. She decided to chase something larger. Arizona offered familiarity. California offered opportunity. And so she moved west. The decision was both exciting and frightening. Anyone who has ever relocated in pursuit of a dream understands the mixture of emotions involved. There is anticipation. There is fear. There is confidence. There is doubt. One moment you feel unstoppable. The next you wonder whether you are making a terrible mistake. But dreams require risk. Safe choices rarely create extraordinary outcomes. For Juliana, Southern California represented possibility. The entertainment industry operated like a giant magnet, pulling ambitious young people toward its center. Models, actors, writers, musicians. Everyone arrived carrying hopes. Everyone believed their breakthrough might be waiting around the next corner. When Juliana arrived in the Los Angeles area, she entered a world where image and opportunity often traveled together. Days could begin with auditions. Afternoons could involve networking events. Evenings could disappear into social gatherings, where everyone seemed connected to someone important. The city rewarded visibility. Being seen mattered. Being remembered mattered. Being present mattered. For an outgoing personality like Juliana's, those environments may have felt natural. Friends later described her as socially active and well-connected. She enjoyed meeting people. She enjoyed building relationships. She seemed comfortable navigating different social circles. In many ways, she appeared perfectly suited for the environment she had chosen. One achievement brought her particular recognition. She won Maxim magazine's Hometown Hottie competition. The title generated attention and exposure. While it did not instantly transform her into a household name, it offered validation. Recognition matters in industries built on visibility. For aspiring performers, every accomplishment becomes a stepping stone. Every acknowledgement feels like evidence that the dream is moving closer. Winning such a competition likely reinforced the belief that progress was happening. That hard work was producing results. That doors were beginning to open. From the outside, her life seemed filled with momentum. Photographs from the period capture someone who appears confident and optimistic. Someone who looked toward the future rather than the past. Someone who expected good things to happen. That expectation is one of the most heartbreaking elements of this story. Because when we examine the lives of victims, we often discover futures that were still under construction. Juliana's future was unfinished. The plans remained incomplete. The goals remained active. There were auditions yet to attend. Opportunities yet to pursue. Conversations yet to have. People yet to meet. Entire chapters of life waiting to be written. Perhaps that is why her story resonates with so many people. She represented possibility. And possibility carries emotional weight. As the years passed, Juliana continued building her life in Santa Monica. The city suited her aspirations. Its coastal beauty offered a sharp contrast to the pressure of Los Angeles while remaining close enough to the entertainment industry. Mornings often began beneath clear skies. The scent of ocean air drifted through neighborhoods. Cafes filled with aspiring creatives working on laptops and discussing projects. The atmosphere encouraged optimism. Living in such an environment can create the feeling that anything is achievable. Juliana appeared to embrace that outlook. Friends remembered someone who enjoyed life. Someone engaged with the world around her. Someone who valued relationships. The social aspect of her personality remained a defining characteristic. She knew people. People knew her. And because of that, when she eventually disappeared from contact, concern emerged quickly. But at this stage in the story, none of those worries existed. Life continued normally. Days blended together in familiar routines. Phone calls. Meetings. Social events. Future plans. The ordinary details that compose everyday life. One of the cruelest realities about homicide cases is how abruptly normality can vanish. A person spends years creating routines. Then a single event destroys them all. Yet before that event occurs, nobody recognizes the significance of ordinary moments. A casual conversation becomes the final conversation. A routine day becomes the last routine day. An ordinary goodbye becomes permanent. Those moments only gain importance in retrospect. At the time, they feel insignificant. Juliana's life appears to have contained many such moments. Simple interactions. Everyday plans. Conversations about the future. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing dramatic. Just life unfolding naturally. And perhaps that is what made the eventual tragedy so shocking. There was no public indication that danger was approaching. No obvious sign that she was standing at the edge of something catastrophic. To friends and family, she remained a young woman pursuing her goals. To acquaintances, she remained part of the vibrant social landscape of Southern California. To herself, she was likely focused on tomorrow rather than danger. Most people are. Human beings are naturally future-oriented. We make plans because we assume we will have time to complete them. We schedule meetings because we assume we will attend them. We imagine future versions of ourselves because we assume those versions will exist. Juliana was no different. She had reasons to believe her future remained open. But there was another aspect of her life that would later become significant. Her family connections. At the time, those relationships appeared entirely ordinary. Like most families, there were business matters, personal matters, and ongoing responsibilities. Nothing about those connections suggested they would eventually become central to a homicide investigation. Yet years later, investigators and prosecutors would revisit those relationships repeatedly. Not because of who Juliana was, but because of who surrounded her. That distinction became critical. The narrative that emerged after her death would suggest that she may have become entangled in circumstances extending far beyond her own life. Circumstances rooted in disputes she did not create. Conflicts she did not begin. Tensions she may not have fully understood. Whether those theories were accurate remains fiercely debated. But they forever altered the way the public viewed the case. Instead of focusing solely on Juliana's personal life, investigators gradually shifted their attention toward a broader network of individuals connected through business and financial relationships. Yet before any of those theories emerged, there was only Juliana. A daughter. A friend. An aspiring actress. An aspiring model. A young woman attempting to build something meaningful. That identity deserves attention, because true crime often risks reducing victims to the circumstances of their deaths. The death becomes the story. The person disappears. But the person should always come first. When family members lose someone, they do not lose a case file. They lose birthdays, future conversations, holiday gatherings, shared memories that will never expand. They lose an entire future relationship. For Juliana's loved ones, that loss would become permanent. And when investigators eventually informed them that she had been killed, the life they remembered would suddenly collide with a reality they never imagined possible. The smiling young woman from photographs. The ambitious dreamer who moved to California. The friend who maintained connections. The daughter who stayed in touch with family. All of those identities would suddenly exist alongside another label. Murder victim. It is a label nobody chooses. A label nobody deserves. And yet it became inseparable from her name. Still, before the violence. Before the investigation. Before the courtroom battles. Before years of controversy and unanswered questions. There was a young woman standing at the beginning of adulthood, believing the future belonged to her. A future filled with possibility. A future she was actively building. A future she expected to see. She could not know that unseen forces were already moving closer. She could not know that within days, her name would become known across California for reasons nobody could have imagined. She could not know that investigators would spend years attempting to reconstruct her final moments. For now, she remained exactly who she had always been. Juliana Redding. Alive. Hopeful. Ambitious. And completely unaware that the final chapter of her life was about to begin. March 15, 2008, began like countless other Saturdays in Santa Monica. The city woke beneath clear California skies. Morning sunlight spilled across sidewalks still damp from coastal mist. The Pacific Ocean shimmered beyond the shoreline, reflecting bands of silver and blue that stretched toward the horizon. Tourists wandered toward the pier. Cyclists moved along the beachfront paths. Restaurant workers prepared for the evening crowds that would soon fill patios and bars. Nothing about the day hinted at violence. Nothing suggested that before the weekend ended, a young woman's life would be extinguished inside her own home. For Juliana Redding, the day likely felt ordinary. Like most people in their early 20s, her attention was probably fixed on immediate concerns. Plans for the coming week. Conversations with friends. Career opportunities. Social obligations. The countless small details that occupy everyday life. No one knows exactly what thoughts crossed her mind that morning. No one knows what she expected from the future. But what we do know is that by the following day, those expectations would no longer matter. At some point during the evening of March 15th, the routine rhythm of her life was interrupted. What happened next remains one of the most fiercely debated aspects of the entire case. The reason is simple. There were no surviving witnesses. No definitive account. No complete timeline accepted by everyone involved. Instead, investigators were forced to reconstruct events from fragments. Physical evidence, phone records, forensic findings, and the silent clues left behind inside an apartment where a brutal confrontation unfolded. Somewhere during those hours, Juliana encountered danger. Whether she recognized it immediately remains unknown. Perhaps the encounter began as a conversation. Perhaps it began as an argument. Perhaps it began with a knock at the door. Investigators would spend years trying to answer those questions. Yet the apartment itself never provided a complete explanation. It only revealed the aftermath. And the aftermath told a horrifying story. The attack that took place was not quick. It was not distant. It was intensely personal. Medical examinations later concluded that Juliana suffered a violent assault before her death. She was beaten. She was strangled. The nature of the injury suggested a struggle. A confrontation occurring at close range. Not an anonymous act committed from a distance. Not a random accident. But direct violence inflicted by one human being upon another. That detail matters. Because strangulation is often regarded by criminal investigators as one of the most personal forms of homicide. It requires proximity. It requires sustained force. It requires an attacker to remain physically present while life is gradually taken away. There is nothing detached about it. Nothing accidental. Nothing momentary. For investigators examining the crime scene, that reality immediately elevated the emotional weight of the case. Someone had not merely attacked Juliana. Someone had remained there long enough to ensure she would not survive. The apartment itself became the silent witness. Every room held potential clues. Every surface carried possible evidence. Every object became part of a puzzle investigators desperately needed to solve. But before police ever entered that apartment, something else may have occurred. Something that would become one of the most haunting details in the entire case. A phone call. A desperate attempt to reach emergency services. Years later, prosecutors would point to evidence suggesting that Juliana managed to dial 911 during the attack. The image is difficult to forget. A young woman realizing she is in danger. Fear replacing confusion. Adrenaline surging through her body. Reaching for a phone. Pressing 3 numbers that millions of people know by instinct. 911. In that moment, help must have felt possible. Across America, people call emergency services every day and survive because of it. The system exists precisely for moments of crisis. Moments when someone has nowhere else to turn. Moments when seconds matter. If investigators were correct, Juliana attempted to seize that chance. The call connected. For at least a brief moment, she was no longer alone. Someone was listening. Someone was there. Yet whatever happened next prevented the call from becoming a rescue. The connection ended abruptly. No completed conversation. No clear explanation. Only silence. Investigators later theorized that the attacker interrupted the call before Juliana could fully communicate what was happening. If true, the implications are chilling. It would mean the attacker knew exactly what she was trying to do. It would mean the attacker actively prevented her from receiving help. It would mean that during one of the most terrifying moments of her life, the possibility of rescue appeared and vanished almost instantly. That theory transformed the 911 call into one of the most emotionally powerful elements of the case. Because it suggested resistance. It suggested determination. It suggested that Juliana fought for survival until the very end. Many homicide cases leave little evidence of the victim's final actions. This case offered a glimpse. A brief indication that she did not surrender quietly. That she tried. That she reached outward toward life even as violence closed around her. The exact sequence of events remains uncertain. But the struggle itself appears undeniable. Crime scene evidence indicated movement throughout portions of the apartment. Investigators believed Juliana attempted to defend herself. That conclusion aligned with the injuries documented during the investigation. Forensic specialists frequently describe scenes of violent struggle as conversations without words. Broken objects. Displaced furniture. Blood patterns. Finger marks. Each detail communicates something. Each detail reveals fragments of human behavior frozen in time. Inside Juliana's apartment, those fragments painted a picture of fear, resistance, and violence. Yet the attacker left behind more than physical destruction. The attacker also left behind questions. Questions that would dominate the investigation for years. Who had entered the apartment? Why had they come? What was their relationship to Juliana? Was the violence planned? Or had events spiraled out of control? At first, detectives considered the most common possibilities. Statistically, homicide victims often know their attackers. Current partners. Former partners. Friends. Acquaintances. Business associates. People within existing social circles. Naturally, investigators began examining Juliana's relationships. Who had spoken with her recently? Who had seen her? Who might have wanted to harm her? The process was methodical. Every name mattered. Every interaction mattered. Every possible lead required examination. But during those earliest hours, detectives possessed only the crime scene itself. They did not yet know where the evidence would eventually lead. They did not know that years of investigation lay ahead. They did not know that federal authorities would later become involved. They did not know that prosecutors would eventually construct a theory involving business disputes and alleged intimidation networks. All of that remained in the future. At the beginning, there was only a young woman lying dead inside her apartment and a city struggling to understand why. Meanwhile, outside the apartment walls, life continued. Cars passed through intersections. Restaurants served customers. People laughed, argued, celebrated, and slept. Most remained completely unaware that a homicide had occurred. This contrast often appears in major criminal cases. A devastating event unfolds while the surrounding world continues normally. The victim's reality changes forever. Everyone else's remains the same. For Juliana's family, however, normal life was already beginning to fracture. Hours passed without contact. Messages went unanswered. Phone calls produced silence. Concern grew. At first, the concern may have seemed manageable. Young adults miss calls. People become busy. Plans change. Yet as time continued passing, worry intensified. The absence became harder to explain. Eventually, concern transformed into fear. And fear led to the request that would ultimately reveal the truth. A welfare check. A simple request asking police to verify that everything was all right. No one making that request could have imagined what officers would find. Families request welfare checks hoping for reassurance. They hope a loved one simply forgot to answer the phone. They hope there is a harmless explanation. They do not expect homicide. They do not expect tragedy. Yet tragedy was waiting behind that apartment door. The attack was already over. The struggle had ended. The future Juliana spent years building had vanished. All that remained were the unanswered questions. Questions investigators would spend years attempting to resolve. Questions that would eventually divide prosecutors, defense attorneys, journalists, and true crime observers. Questions that remain controversial even today. But on the night of March 15th, none of those debates existed yet. There was only violence. A sudden eruption of brutality inside a home that should have been safe. A young woman facing unimaginable fear. A desperate attempt to summon help. And a final confrontation that ended in death. The details of what happened inside that apartment may never be fully known. The exact words spoken may be lost forever. The precise sequence of actions may remain uncertain. Yet one fact stands beyond dispute. Somewhere during those dark hours in Santa Monica, Juliana Redding's life came to a violent end. And with her death, a mystery was born. A mystery that would grow larger with every new piece of evidence. A mystery that would eventually stretch from a crime scene to a courtroom. A mystery that, despite years of investigation and public scrutiny, would leave behind one haunting question. Who was responsible for the final moments of Juliana Redding's life? The search for that answer was only beginning. When the call came requesting a welfare check, it did not initially sound like the beginning of a homicide investigation. Requests like these happen every day. A parent cannot reach a son. A friend becomes concerned after unanswered messages. A neighbor notices something unusual. Most of the time, officers arrive, knock on a door, and discover a perfectly ordinary explanation. Someone forgot to charge a phone. Someone left town unexpectedly. Someone simply wanted to be alone. The outcome is usually uneventful. On March 16, 2008, there was every reason to hope the situation would be no different. But as Santa Monica police officers approached Juliana Redding's apartment complex, subtle details began to suggest otherwise. The atmosphere felt wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not immediately alarming. Just enough to create unease. Experienced officers often describe investigations this way. Long before a crime scene reveals itself completely, certain details begin to stand out. Small inconsistencies. Tiny observations that refuse to fit comfortably into an ordinary explanation. As officers moved through the property, one detail immediately drew attention. Blood. Not a massive amount. Not the kind of evidence that instantly explained everything. But enough to stop them in their tracks. Enough to transform a routine welfare check into something far more serious. The sight of blood changes the nature of an investigation immediately. What moments earlier appeared to be a missing person concern suddenly becomes a potential emergency. The officers became more cautious. More alert. Every step carried new weight. Every observation mattered. Somewhere nearby, waves continued crashing against the California shoreline. Traffic continued moving through Santa Monica's streets. People enjoyed the final hours of a weekend that still felt ordinary. Inside the apartment complex, however, a different reality was emerging. The officers proceeded toward Juliana's residence. At that moment, nobody knew whether she was injured, unconscious, or perhaps already gone. Every possibility remained open. The uncertainty created tension. Those who work in law enforcement often speak about the emotional transition that occurs when an investigation suddenly changes direction. One moment, assumptions point toward safety. The next, every instinct begins preparing for something much worse. As officers entered the apartment, they encountered a scene that immediately erased any hope of a simple explanation. Juliana Redding was dead. The young woman, who had moved to California to pursue dreams of acting and modeling, had suffered a violent death inside her own home. The apartment no longer looked like a place where someone lived. It looked like a place where something terrible had happened. Investigators arriving at homicide scenes frequently describe a strange contradiction. The location still contains evidence of ordinary life. Personal belongings remain exactly where they were left. Photographs sit on shelves. Clothing hangs in closets. Coffee cups remain on counters. Life appears frozen. Yet woven through those ordinary details are unmistakable signs of violence. The contrast can be deeply unsettling. Juliana's apartment presented that same contradiction. Evidence indicated a struggle. Evidence indicated fear. Evidence indicated resistance. Whatever had happened inside those walls had not unfolded peacefully. Crime scene technicians began their work almost immediately. Every homicide scene represents a puzzle. The victim can no longer speak. The attacker is gone. The only remaining witnesses are physical evidence and forensic science. Investigators must learn to read both. Photographs were taken from every angle. Measurements were recorded. Objects were catalogued. Potential evidence was carefully preserved. The process may appear slow from the outside, but every minute matters. A fingerprint overlooked today may become the breakthrough months later. A biological sample ignored at the beginning may ultimately identify a suspect. Nothing can be assumed. Nothing can be rushed. As detectives moved through the apartment, they began constructing the earliest version of the story. Not a complete story. Not even a reliable one. Simply a preliminary understanding of what might have occurred. The injuries suggested a brutal assault. Medical findings would later confirm that Juliana had been beaten and strangled. This was not a natural death. Not an accident. Not a sudden medical emergency. The evidence pointed clearly toward homicide. That conclusion raised immediate questions. Who had access to the apartment? Who had seen Juliana recently? Who knew where she lived? Who might have wanted to harm her? At the beginning of any murder investigation, detectives often start close to the victim. Relationships. Friendships. Romantic connections. Recent conflicts. Financial issues. Work-related disputes. The reasoning is straightforward. Most homicide victims know their killers. Statistically, strangers are often less likely to be responsible than people already connected to the victim's life. As investigators began examining Juliana's world, they searched for anything that might explain the violence. But the apartment itself continued offering clues. Some were visible immediately. Others required laboratory analysis. Forensic evidence can be deceptively powerful. A crime scene may appear chaotic, yet hidden within that chaos are microscopic details capable of surviving long after memories fade. A strand of hair. A fingerprint. A trace of DNA. A tiny biological transfer invisible to the naked eye. Modern investigations rely heavily upon these fragments, because human beings leave traces of themselves everywhere they go. Every touch. Every movement. Every interaction creates opportunities for evidence. The technicians processing Juliana's apartment understood this reality. They collected samples methodically. Nothing was considered too small. Nothing was considered insignificant. Meanwhile, detectives focused on another critical task. Reconstructing Juliana's final known movements. The final 24 hours of a victim's life often become one of the most important sections of an investigation. Who did she call? Who called her? Where had she gone? Who had seen her alive? Each answer potentially narrows the search. Each answer eliminates possibilities. Yet in this case, certainty proved difficult to obtain. Some details seemed straightforward. Others became increasingly complicated. Then there was the matter of the 911 call. As investigators reviewed available information, the significance of that call grew steadily larger. If Juliana truly placed an emergency call during the attack, it meant something extremely important. It meant she recognized the danger before the violence ended. It meant she was conscious and actively seeking help. Most importantly, it potentially established part of the timeline. The call represented a fixed point within a sea of uncertainty. A moment investigators could analyze. A moment they could compare against other evidence. A moment that might eventually help identify who was present. The more detectives examined the circumstances surrounding the call, the more haunting it became. The idea that someone reached emergency services only to be silenced moments later created a chilling image. It suggested desperation. It suggested courage. It suggested a victim refusing to surrender. Yet even that clue generated new questions. Who interrupted the call? Why? What exactly was happening at that moment? Unfortunately, the answers remained elusive. The apartment revealed evidence of violence, but violence alone does not identify an attacker. A murder scene may explain what happened. Explaining who committed the crime is often far more difficult. Outside the investigation, news of the homicide began spreading. Friends learned that Juliana was gone. Family members faced a reality almost impossible to accept. Shock often arrives before grief. The human mind resists sudden tragedy. People replay recent conversations. They search for misunderstandings. They hope someone made a mistake. For Juliana's loved ones, those hopes disappeared quickly. The evidence left little room for denial. This was murder. The realization transformed every memory. The last phone call became significant. The last meeting became significant. Every recent interaction suddenly carried emotional weight. For detectives, however, emotion had to coexist with procedure. Their responsibility was finding the truth. And at that stage, the truth remained frustratingly distant. The crime scene provided evidence, but not certainty. The victim provided questions, but not answers. The investigation required direction. So detectives began doing what homicide investigators have always done. They followed every lead. Friends were interviewed. Associates were identified. Background information was collected. Potential motives were explored. Nothing was ruled out. At first glance, some investigators may have expected the solution to emerge quickly. Many cases do. A jealous partner. A personal grudge. A recent argument. A clear suspect. But this investigation refused to cooperate. The more detectives searched, the more complicated the picture became. Potential explanations appeared. Then collapsed. New leads emerged. Then stalled. The straightforward narrative investigators hoped to find remained frustratingly out of reach. And yet, despite the uncertainty, the apartment continued speaking through evidence. The forensic findings accumulating inside laboratories would eventually become some of the most discussed aspects of the entire case. DNA. Fingerprints. Biological traces. Evidence that seemed capable of identifying exactly who had been present. Evidence that would later become central to one of the most controversial courtroom battles in California homicide history. But in those early days, investigators did not yet know where the evidence would lead. They only knew that a young woman had been killed. They only knew that the attack appeared deliberate. And they only knew that somewhere beyond the apartment walls, a killer had walked away. As the crime scene investigation continued, one uncomfortable reality became impossible to ignore. This case was not going to solve itself. The answers would not emerge from a single witness. There would be no immediate confession. No obvious suspect standing at the center of the evidence. Instead, detectives were facing a mystery that would grow more complex with every passing month. The apartment had revealed the crime. Now investigators needed to reveal the criminal. And the path toward that answer was about to lead far beyond anything they initially expected. The first weeks of a homicide investigation are often defined by momentum. Detectives move quickly. Leads arrive constantly. Witnesses still remember details clearly. Phone records are fresh. Surveillance footage, if it exists, is easier to obtain. There is a sense that the truth is close enough to touch. In the case of Juliana Redding, investigators initially believed the same thing. The crime scene had produced evidence. The victim had an active social life. She lived in a city filled with people who knew her. Surely, somewhere within that network of relationships, someone possessed the missing piece. Someone had seen something. Someone knew something. Someone could explain why a 21-year-old aspiring actress and model had been beaten and strangled inside her own apartment. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the investigation began encountering a frustrating reality. Nothing fit neatly. The obvious explanations refused to hold together. Detectives started where most homicide investigations begin. The people closest to the victim. Friends were interviewed. Family members were interviewed. Professional contacts were interviewed. Acquaintances were interviewed. Investigators carefully reconstructed Juliana's recent life, searching for signs of conflict. Had she been afraid of anyone? Had she received threats? Had she argued with someone recently? Had she mentioned concerns about her safety? The answers failed to reveal a clear suspect. There was no former boyfriend immediately standing out as an obvious danger. No publicly known obsession. No explosive personal feud. No dramatic confrontation that appeared capable of explaining such violence. Instead, detectives found themselves staring into a maze of ordinary relationships. The kind of social network expected in the life of a young woman building a career in Southern California. People came and went. Friendships overlapped. Professional contacts intersected. Nothing immediately screamed murder. Yet someone had clearly entered that apartment. Someone had clearly participated in the violent events that ended Juliana's life. The challenge was identifying who. As investigators expanded their search, they began examining every aspect of Juliana's world. Financial records. Telephone communications. Personal schedules. Business connections. Every document became important. Every conversation mattered. The process was exhausting. Modern homicide investigations often involve thousands of pages of reports, hundreds of interviews, and countless hours spent reviewing information that ultimately leads nowhere. Detectives understand this reality. Most leads fail. Most theories collapse. Finding the truth often means eliminating hundreds of false possibilities first. That process was already beginning in Santa Monica. Months passed. The public heard occasional updates. Friends and family waited anxiously. Yet no arrest came. No suspect was publicly identified. The silence became increasingly uncomfortable. The longer a homicide remains unsolved, the greater the pressure becomes. Families want answers. Communities want reassurance. Investigators want progress. Everyone begins asking the same question. What are the police missing? The answer, in this case, turned out to be something few people expected. Because as detectives continued pulling at loose threads, the investigation slowly drifted away from Juliana's personal life. Instead, attention began focusing on people around her. More specifically, attention began focusing on relationships connected to her family. This shift did not happen overnight. It emerged gradually. One interview led to another. One document pointed toward another document. One connection revealed another connection. Eventually, investigators found themselves examining a business dispute that seemed, at first glance, completely unrelated to the murder of a young actress. Yet the deeper they looked, the more significant it appeared. At the center of this emerging theory stood a wealthy Lebanese-born physician named Munir Uwaida. The name carried little meaning to the public initially. He was not a celebrity. He was not a household figure. Yet prosecutors would later argue that understanding his relationship with Juliana's family was essential to understanding the case itself. According to investigators, business dealings involving Juliana's father and Uwaida had deteriorated badly before the murder. Disagreements allegedly developed. Trust allegedly eroded. Financial tensions reportedly increased. Exactly how severe those conflicts became would later become a major point of debate. But for detectives searching desperately for motive, the dispute offered something valuable. A possible explanation. For the first time, the investigation seemed to possess a direction. If prosecutors were correct, Juliana herself might not have been the primary focus of the conflict. Instead, she may have become connected to it because of her family. That possibility changed everything. Most people assume murder emerges from direct personal hostility between victim and attacker. But investigators occasionally encounter cases where the victim becomes entangled in disputes originating elsewhere. Business rivalries, financial disagreements, power struggles, conflicts that spread beyond their original participants. The theory developing inside the investigation suggested precisely that scenario. Yet theory alone was not enough. Detectives needed evidence. And evidence eventually began pointing toward new names. One of those names was Kelly Sapak. Another was Ronnie Wayne Case. To investigators, these individuals represented more than possible witnesses. They represented potential suspects. The challenge was proving it. As forensic testing continued, detectives received results that appeared increasingly significant. DNA evidence, fingerprint evidence, biological traces. The kinds of findings capable of transforming a speculative theory into a criminal case. According to prosecutors, Park's DNA appeared in multiple locations associated with the crime scene. Not simply one location. Multiple locations. The evidence reportedly extended across different surfaces and items connected to Juliana. Investigators viewed this as a major breakthrough. After months of uncertainty, they finally possessed something tangible. Something scientific. Something juries often find persuasive. DNA has acquired an almost mythical reputation within modern criminal investigations. Television dramas frequently portray it as an instant solution. A magical answer to complicated questions. Reality is rarely so simple. DNA can establish presence. It can establish contact. But it does not always establish timing. And timing is often everything. Still, detectives examining the evidence believed they were moving closer to identifying the person responsible. The forensic findings appeared too substantial to ignore. Meanwhile, investigators continued exploring the broader theory surrounding the alleged business dispute. If Juliana's death truly stemmed from tensions involving her family, then motive suddenly became clearer. Not proven, but clearer. The emerging narrative suggested intimidation, pressure, an attempt to influence people through fear. Whether that pressure was intended to become deadly remained uncertain. Yet prosecutors would eventually argue that events escalated into murder. The theory was dramatic, perhaps even shocking. A young aspiring actress allegedly becoming the victim of a conflict rooted in money and influence rather than personal relationships. It was the kind of narrative that attracted public attention immediately. Yet inside law enforcement circles, investigators remained cautious. Experience teaches detectives an important lesson. Evidence and theories must support one another. A compelling story means nothing if the evidence cannot sustain it. Likewise, evidence means little if investigators cannot explain why the crime occurred. Both elements must work together. That challenge became increasingly apparent as the case evolved. While some evidence appeared strong, important gaps remained. No eyewitness emerged describing the attack. No confession surfaced. No video recording captured the crime. The investigation remained largely dependent upon circumstantial reconstruction. And circumstantial cases, even strong ones, can become vulnerable under scrutiny. Nevertheless, authorities believed they had enough to move forward. In 2010, more than 2 years after Juliana's death, arrests were finally made. Kelly Sapak was taken into custody. Ronnie Wayne Case was also arrested. For Juliana's family, the arrests represented a major development. Perhaps the most significant development since the day of the murder. After years of waiting, investigators were publicly identifying individuals they believed played roles in the crime. Many observers assumed the mystery was nearing resolution. The public often views arrests as the final chapter. In reality, arrests frequently mark the beginning of an entirely new battle. Because proving guilt inside a courtroom requires far more than suspicion. Far more than theories. Far more than headlines. Everything must survive legal scrutiny. Every piece of evidence must withstand attack. Every assumption must be tested. Every weakness becomes a target. At the time of the arrests, however, those future battles remained largely invisible. Most attention focused on the dramatic nature of the allegations. The case had transformed from a seemingly random homicide into an investigation involving alleged enforcers, business disputes, and claims of intimidation. The narrative felt almost cinematic. Yet beneath the headlines, prosecutors were preparing for an enormous challenge. Because despite the arrests, one fundamental problem remained. The investigation had produced evidence suggesting who might have been involved. It had produced theories regarding motive. It had produced a narrative capable of explaining why Juliana may have been targeted. But it still lacked the one thing juries often crave most: absolute certainty. An absolute certainty would become the battlefield upon which the entire case ultimately stood. As investigators finalized reports and prosecutors prepared charges, the questions that had haunted the case from the beginning continued lingering in the background. Who entered the apartment? What exactly happened during those final moments? Why was the 911 call interrupted? And most importantly, could anyone truly prove who placed their hands around Juliana Redding's throat? The investigation believed it was finally approaching an answer. The courtroom would soon decide whether that answer was enough. By 2010, more than 2 years had passed since the death of Juliana Redding. For her family, those years had been measured not by holidays or seasons, but by waiting. Waiting for answers. Waiting for arrests. Waiting for someone to explain why a young woman, with her entire future ahead of her, had died alone inside her apartment. For investigators, the passage of time carried a different kind of pressure. Unsolved homicide cases have a way of lingering. They sit on desks. They occupy conversations. They follow detectives home at night. Every unanswered question becomes a reminder that somewhere, the truth remains unfinished. When authorities finally announced arrests, it appeared that the long search had reached a turning point. The case that had once seemed lost in uncertainty suddenly possessed direction. Names. Suspects. A motive. A theory. For the first time, investigators could present a narrative explaining how the pieces supposedly fit together. Yet the deeper the public looked into that narrative, the stranger the case became. Because this was not the kind of murder story most people expected. There was no jealous lover standing at the center. No explosive domestic dispute. No obvious emotional motive. Instead, prosecutors believed they had uncovered something far more complicated. A chain of relationships extending beyond Juliana herself. A chain involving business disagreements, financial conflicts, and individuals who allegedly operated within a world of pressure and intimidation. At the center of the prosecution's emerging theory stood the deteriorating relationship between Juliana's father and Dr. Munir Uwaida. According to investigators, business dealings between the two men had collapsed badly before the murder. The exact details were complex, involving allegations and financial disagreements that stretched far beyond the simple world of personal conflict. What mattered to prosecutors was not merely the dispute itself. What mattered was what they believed happened afterward. They argued that the conflict created a motive. A reason for pressure. A reason for threats. A reason why certain individuals might become involved. The theory was bold. According to prosecutors, Juliana had become connected to a battle that was never truly hers. She was not the origin of the dispute. She was not the person negotiating financial arrangements. She was not the individual engaged in business disagreements. Yet somehow, investigators believed she became entangled in the consequences. The idea was chilling. A young woman allegedly pulled into a dangerous conflict simply because of her connection to someone else. As detectives continued examining evidence, attention increasingly focused on Kelly Park. Park did not fit the image many people expected when imagining a homicide suspect. Yet according to prosecutors, appearances were irrelevant. What mattered was evidence. And evidence, they believed, was accumulating. The forensic findings became particularly important. DNA evidence had already begun reshaping modern criminal investigations across America. Jurors often viewed it as powerful, objective, and difficult to challenge. Unlike eyewitnesses, DNA does not forget. Unlike witnesses, DNA does not change its story. It simply exists. Or at least that is how many people perceive it. In Juliana's case, prosecutors believed the forensic evidence provided their breakthrough. According to their findings, Park's DNA appeared in multiple locations connected to the crime scene. Not just one item. Not just one surface. Multiple points of contact. The significance of that claim cannot be overstated. Finding a suspect's DNA in a single location might raise questions. Finding it repeatedly creates a much stronger impression. Investigators interpreted the evidence as proof that Park had been present during critical events surrounding the murder. The findings extended beyond DNA alone. Fingerprints allegedly linked Park to the apartment as well. Again, investigators viewed this as highly significant. Every forensic discovery appeared to strengthen the emerging narrative. Every new finding seemed to reduce the space available for alternative explanations. For detectives who had spent years struggling to identify a suspect, the evidence felt like validation. The pieces were finally beginning to align. Yet despite the apparent progress, problems remained. One of the most important challenges involved timing. Forensic evidence can often establish presence. Establishing precisely when that presence occurred is much harder. A fingerprint does not arrive with a timestamp. DNA does not announce the exact moment it was deposited. Those limitations would eventually become crucial. But during this stage of the investigation, prosecutors remained focused on building their theory. And their theory continued expanding. According to authorities, Park was not acting alone. Investigators also arrested Ronnie Wayne Case. Prosecutors argued that Case participated in a broader network connected to the alleged effort to pressure individuals involved in the underlying business conflict. The accusations transformed the case dramatically. What began as a murder investigation now carried hints of conspiracy. Pressure campaigns. Alleged intimidation. A network of individuals operating behind the scenes. For the public, the story became increasingly fascinating. The murder of a young aspiring actress had evolved into something resembling a crime thriller. Yet investigators insisted this was not fiction. This was their explanation for what happened. This was the path they believed led to Juliana's death. Still, one question remained stubbornly difficult to answer. Why Juliana? Even among those who accepted the prosecution's theory, the question lingered. What role had she actually played? Was she specifically targeted? Was she intended to be frightened rather than harmed? Did events escalate unexpectedly? Or had violence always been part of the plan? The answers remained uncertain. And uncertainty has a way of creating vulnerability inside criminal cases. The more complicated a theory becomes, the more opportunities exist for doubt. Defense attorneys understand this principle well. Every assumption becomes a target. Every missing detail becomes a weapon. Every unanswered question becomes an opportunity. At this stage, however, the defense had not yet begun its public battle. The investigation remained the dominant story. And from the investigators' perspective, momentum was finally on their side. Years earlier, they possessed only a crime scene. Now they possessed suspects. Years earlier, they possessed only questions. Now they possessed a narrative. Whether that narrative could survive courtroom scrutiny remained unknown. But investigators had crossed an important threshold. The case no longer felt directionless. The breakthrough extended beyond arrests. It also reshaped how people viewed the murder itself. Before the arrests, many observers assumed the crime emerged from personal relationships. A romantic conflict. A social dispute. An emotional confrontation. The prosecution's theory challenged those assumptions completely. Instead, it suggested a different kind of danger. A danger rooted not in passion, but in power. Not in jealousy, but in influence. Not in spontaneous emotion, but in calculated pressure. That possibility disturbed many people. It implied that Juliana's death might represent something larger than a personal tragedy. It implied she may have become collateral damage in a conflict unfolding beyond her control. Whether the theory was ultimately correct or not, it fundamentally altered public perception. The case was no longer merely about identifying a killer. It was about understanding a hidden world operating beneath the surface. A world prosecutors believed connected business disputes to violence. As preparations for trial slowly advanced, investigators continued refining their evidence. Reports were completed. Witnesses were interviewed repeatedly. Forensic findings were reviewed and re-reviewed. Prosecutors understood what awaited them. Arresting suspects is one challenge. Convicting them is another. The courtroom demands precision. Every claim requires support. Every conclusion requires evidence. The burden of proof rests entirely on the prosecution. And in a case as unusual as this one, that burden would be enormous. Yet despite the obstacles ahead, there was a growing sense among investigators that they had achieved something important. For years, the case had seemed trapped in uncertainty. Now it possessed shape, direction, a possible explanation. The breakthrough had arrived. At least from law enforcement's perspective. The mystery of who might be responsible no longer appeared completely unsolvable. But breakthroughs can be deceptive. What feels like the final answer in an investigation sometimes becomes the beginning of an entirely new battle. And as the case moved toward trial, that battle was about to begin. Because while investigators believed they had finally uncovered the truth behind Juliana Redding's death, defense attorneys were preparing to challenge every part of that truth. The crime scene would be examined again. The forensic evidence would be dissected. The timeline would be questioned. The motive would be attacked. And the breakthrough that seemed so convincing during the investigation would soon face its greatest test. A courtroom filled with 12 ordinary people asked to decide whether the evidence truly proved what prosecutors claimed, or whether the mystery surrounding Juliana Redding's death remained far from solved. By the time the case reached trial in 2013, more than 5 years had passed since Juliana Redding's death. 5 years of investigations. 5 years of theories. 5 years of unanswered questions. For Juliana's family, the trial represented something precious and fragile, the possibility of justice. For prosecutors, it represented the culmination of years spent assembling evidence, interviewing witnesses, analyzing forensic reports, and constructing a narrative they believed explained what happened inside that Santa Monica apartment. For the defense, however, it represented something entirely different. An opportunity. An opportunity to expose weaknesses. An opportunity to challenge assumptions. An opportunity to convince jurors that suspicion and proof are not the same thing. The courtroom became the final battlefield. And like many controversial murder trials, the outcome would depend less on what people believed happened and more on what could actually be proven. From the beginning, prosecutors faced a difficult challenge. They were not presenting a simple homicide case. The story they intended to tell involved layers of relationships, business conflicts, alleged intimidation tactics, and events unfolding largely behind closed doors. To secure a conviction, they needed jurors to accept not only the physical evidence, but also the broader explanation surrounding it. The prosecution's theory remained largely consistent with the conclusions investigators had developed during the years following the murder. According to their argument, Kelly Park functioned as an enforcer connected to individuals involved in the business dispute surrounding Juliana's family. The confrontation with Juliana, prosecutors claimed, was intended as part of a pressure campaign. Somewhere during that confrontation, violence escalated. The encounter ended with Juliana dead. To support that theory, prosecutors leaned heavily on forensic evidence. Again and again, attention returned to DNA. The evidence appeared impressive on paper. According to prosecutors, Park's DNA had been found on Juliana's body. It had been found on her clothing. It had been found on her telephone. It had been discovered at multiple locations within the apartment. In addition, fingerprints allegedly linked Park to the scene. The prosecution viewed these findings as powerful. To them, the evidence painted a straightforward picture. Park had been present. Not merely nearby. Not merely connected through distant associations. Present inside the apartment where Juliana died. Jurors listened carefully as experts explained the forensic findings. Modern criminal trials often rely heavily upon scientific testimony. DNA evidence, in particular, carries substantial influence. Many jurors enter courtrooms believing DNA represents the closest thing to certainty available in criminal investigations. Prosecutors understood this. They emphasized the forensic evidence repeatedly. Every biological trace strengthened their narrative. Every fingerprint appeared to reinforce their conclusions. Yet evidence rarely exists in isolation. The defense knew that attacking the forensic findings directly would be difficult. Instead, they focused on something else. Interpretation. Because evidence may reveal facts. But people still determine what those facts mean. And meaning can be challenged. The defense's strategy centered on creating doubt. Not proving an alternative theory. Not identifying another killer. Simply creating enough uncertainty to prevent conviction. The distinction is important. In criminal court, defendants do not need to prove innocence. Prosecutors must prove guilt. The burden belongs entirely to the state. If reasonable doubt exists, conviction becomes impossible. Defense attorneys attacked the prosecution's case methodically. They highlighted what was missing. No eyewitness had observed Park killing Juliana. No witness described watching the fatal attack unfold. No confession existed. No recording captured the crime. No direct evidence established the exact moment Park allegedly entered the apartment. These points became central to the defense's argument. Again and again, they returned to the same question. Could anyone actually prove that Park committed murder? Not merely that he had contact with evidence. Not merely that investigators suspected him. Could anyone prove beyond reasonable doubt that he was the killer? The question resonated because it struck at the heart of the prosecution's challenge. DNA evidence can establish presence. But presence alone does not necessarily establish guilt. This distinction became one of the most important themes of the trial. Defense attorneys argued that prosecutors were asking jurors to fill gaps with assumptions. To infer events rather than observe them. To connect dots that might not truly belong together. Every uncertainty became an opportunity. Every unanswered question became a weapon. The timeline became especially important. Prosecutors believed the forensic evidence demonstrated Park's involvement. Defense attorneys countered by emphasizing a crucial limitation. DNA and fingerprints do not automatically reveal when contact occurred. Even if evidence established that Park had been present at some point, did it establish he was there during the murder? The defense argued that prosecutors could not answer that question with certainty. Jurors listened as experts, investigators, and attorneys presented competing interpretations. The same evidence generated dramatically different conclusions depending upon who was speaking. To prosecutors, the forensic findings pointed directly toward guilt. To the defense, the findings merely demonstrated contact that prosecutors could not place within a definitive timeline. As the trial continued, the broader theory involving business disputes and alleged intimidation networks received significant attention. Prosecutors argued that the conflict provided motive. Without motive, the case felt incomplete. Jurors naturally want to understand why crimes occur. Violence rarely exists in a vacuum. People seek reasons, explanations, narratives that make events understandable. The prosecution attempted to provide that narrative. They argued that the deteriorating relationship involving Juliana's family and Munir Uwaida created circumstances that eventually led to deadly consequences. Yet motive can be one of the most difficult elements to prove. Unlike fingerprints or DNA, motive exists largely within human intentions. Intentions are rarely visible. They must be inferred. An inference creates vulnerability. Defense attorneys seized upon that vulnerability. They argued that prosecutors were constructing an elaborate story unsupported by direct evidence. A story that sounded compelling. A story that explained many details. But a story nonetheless. The distinction mattered. Courtrooms are not places where the most convincing story automatically wins. They are places where evidence must support every critical claim. As testimony continued, observers began recognizing a growing divide. The prosecution possessed evidence many considered substantial. The defense possessed questions many considered legitimate. Neither side appeared capable of completely destroying the other's position. The result was uncertainty. And uncertainty is dangerous for prosecutors. The legal standard requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. Not probable guilt. Not likely guilt. Proof strong enough to overcome reasonable uncertainty. As closing arguments approached, tension intensified. Juliana's family sat through proceedings carrying years of grief and expectation. The defendants faced the possibility of life-altering convictions. Jurors prepared to undertake one of the most serious responsibilities in the justice system. Determining whether evidence satisfies the highest burden of proof used in American law. The prosecution delivered its final arguments. They urged jurors to focus on the evidence. The DNA. The fingerprints. The connections between individuals. The alleged motive. Taken together, prosecutors argued, the pieces formed a clear picture. A picture pointing directly toward guilt. The defense responded with equal intensity. They reminded jurors that criminal convictions require certainty beyond reasonable doubt. Not speculation. Not assumptions. Not narratives built upon missing links. The evidence, they argued, simply did not reach that threshold. Then came the waiting. Deliberations. Private discussions among jurors. Careful examination of evidence. Repeated consideration of testimony. Inside those deliberation rooms, cases often become simpler than they appear in public. Jurors ultimately ask themselves a straightforward question. Are we sure? Not absolutely sure. The law does not require perfection. But sure enough to convict. Sure enough to take away a person's freedom. Sure enough to declare that uncertainty no longer matters. For Kelly Sapak, the answer would ultimately prove decisive. After weeks of testimony and years of investigation leading to this moment, the verdict arrived. Not guilty. The words landed with enormous force. Park was acquitted of first-degree murder. Park was acquitted of second-degree murder. The prosecution's case had failed to secure a conviction. For some observers, the verdict was shocking. They looked at the forensic evidence and struggled to understand how acquittal was possible. How could DNA appear in so many places? How could fingerprints allegedly connect a suspect to the scene? How could such evidence fail to persuade a jury? Others viewed the verdict differently. They argued that prosecutors never successfully bridged the gap between suspicion and certainty. That evidence suggesting involvement was not the same as evidence proving murder. That reasonable doubt remained. And under American law, reasonable doubt demands acquittal. The courtroom decision resolved one question, while leaving many others untouched. Legally, Kelly Park was not responsible for Juliana Redding's murder. But the verdict did not explain what actually happened. It did not identify another killer. It did not eliminate every mystery. Instead, it created a new reality. A homicide investigation that had produced suspects, forensic evidence, arrests, and a lengthy trial had still failed to deliver a criminal conviction. For Juliana's family, the outcome was devastating. The years of waiting had not produced the closure they hoped for. The person prosecutors accused of killing their daughter would leave court without a murder conviction. For investigators, the verdict represented a painful setback. They had spent years building the case. Years pursuing what they believed was the truth. Yet belief alone could not overcome reasonable doubt. As the courtroom emptied and the trial concluded, one fact became impossible to ignore. Juliana Redding was still dead. The questions surrounding her final moments still existed. And despite years of investigation, and one of the most closely watched homicide trials in California during that period, the mystery at the center of the case remained unresolved. Justice had been sought. A verdict had been reached. But whether the truth had truly been found remained a matter of fierce debate. And that debate would continue long after the courtroom lights dimmed and the trial became history. When the trial ended, the headlines focused on a single fact: not guilty. For many people following the case, those two words felt like an ending. Courtrooms often create the illusion of finality. A verdict is announced. The judge speaks. Lawyers gather their papers. Reporters rush outside. Cameras disappear. Public attention gradually shifts elsewhere. The story appears complete. But for families of homicide victims, verdicts rarely mark the true end of anything. Sometimes they create closure. Sometimes they deepen uncertainty. In the case of Juliana Redding, uncertainty remained. And uncertainty can become its own kind of burden. Years earlier, her family had been forced to accept an unimaginable reality. Their daughter was gone. The young woman who had left Arizona to pursue opportunities in California would never return. The dreams she carried would remain unfinished. The future she imagined would never arrive. That grief alone would have been difficult enough. Yet grief accompanied by unanswered questions can become even heavier. Because the human mind naturally seeks explanations. People want causes. People want reasons. People want to understand why tragedy occurred. The trial had promised answers. Instead, it produced debate. Even after the verdict, the central mystery remained unresolved. Who killed Juliana Redding? The legal system had delivered its conclusion regarding Kelly Park. But legal conclusions and public certainty are not always the same thing. In the months and years that followed, discussions surrounding the case continued. Some observers remained convinced that investigators had identified the correct suspect. Others believed the prosecution had failed to prove its allegations because critical pieces of evidence were missing. Both sides pointed to the same case. Both sides examined the same facts. Yet they reached dramatically different conclusions. That division explains why the murder of Juliana Redding continues to attract attention long after the trial ended. Many homicide cases become forgotten once court proceedings conclude. This one refused to disappear. Part of the reason lies in the evidence itself. The forensic findings remain difficult to ignore. Throughout the investigation and trial, prosecutors emphasized the presence of DNA and fingerprint evidence connecting Park to the crime scene. To many members of the public, those details seemed overwhelming. Modern society has been conditioned to view forensic science as extraordinarily persuasive. Television dramas often portray DNA as nearly infallible. News reports frequently describe genetic evidence as a powerful tool capable of solving crimes that once appeared impossible. As a result, many people instinctively assume that substantial DNA evidence should lead directly to conviction. Yet criminal trials are rarely that simple. Jurors are instructed to evaluate not merely whether evidence exists, but what that evidence proves. That distinction became the dividing line in this case. Supporters of the prosecution looked at the forensic findings and saw guilt. Supporters of the acquittal looked at the same evidence and saw uncertainty. The disagreement continues because neither interpretation completely eliminates every question. This ambiguity transformed the case into something larger than a single criminal investigation. It became a discussion about reasonable doubt itself. The concept sounds straightforward. In practice, it can be extraordinarily complicated. How much doubt is reasonable? How much evidence is enough? At what point does suspicion become certainty? These questions sit at the heart of every criminal trial. In Juliana's case, 12 jurors ultimately concluded that the prosecution had not crossed that threshold. Whether others agree with that decision remains another matter entirely. The aftermath of controversial verdicts often follows a predictable pattern. Investigators defend their conclusions. Defense attorneys defend the acquittal. Journalists revisit evidence. True crime communities debate theories. Years later, conversations continue. Juliana's case followed that pattern almost perfectly. Online forums filled with arguments. Podcasts examined the evidence. Crime enthusiasts analyzed timelines, motives, and forensic findings. The same question returned repeatedly. What really happened inside that apartment? The answer remained elusive. One reason the mystery persists involves the nature of the prosecution's theory. The alleged motive centered not on a traditional emotional conflict, but on a complex business dispute. That complexity fascinated observers. People are accustomed to homicide cases involving jealousy, revenge, romantic relationships, or personal grudges. Those motives feel familiar. This case felt different. The idea that a young aspiring actress might have become entangled in a larger financial conflict created an unsettling narrative. It suggested that danger could emerge from places most people never expect. Whether that narrative accurately reflected reality remains controversial. But its uniqueness helped ensure that the case would not be forgotten. Another factor contributing to the enduring fascination is the 911 call. Few details from the investigation resonate as powerfully. The image remains haunting. A young woman allegedly attempting to reach emergency services during the attack. A connection established. Hope briefly appearing. Then silence. The possibility that help came within reach only to vanish moments later continues to disturb those who study the case. The detail humanizes the tragedy in a particularly painful way. It reminds people that Juliana was not merely a victim discovered after the fact. She was a person fighting desperately to survive. A person who may have believed rescue was possible. A person trying to hold on to life. For many observers, that detail remains one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the entire story. Years after the trial, the legal outcome remained unchanged. No one stood convicted of Juliana's murder. No final criminal responsibility had been established. The homicide existed in a strange legal space. Investigated extensively. Prosecuted aggressively. Debated publicly. Yet unresolved in the way that matters most. The absence of a definitive answer leaves a vacuum. And human beings naturally attempt to fill vacuums. Some believe investigators solved the case, but failed to satisfy the burden required for conviction. Others believe investigators focused too heavily on one theory while overlooking alternatives. Still others suspect that critical information remains undiscovered. Without a universally accepted conclusion, speculation thrives. Perhaps that is inevitable. After all, mysteries invite interpretation. The less certainty exists, the more room remains for competing explanations. Yet amid all the debates, theories, and legal arguments, there is a danger. The danger of losing sight of the person at the center of the story. Juliana Redding. The young woman whose life ended long before the public controversy began. True crime discussions sometimes become consumed by suspects, evidence, and courtroom strategy. Victims gradually fade into the background. Their identities become secondary. Their humanity becomes overshadowed. But Juliana's story deserves remembrance beyond the mystery. She was more than a case file. More than a headline. More than a forensic investigation. She was a daughter. A friend. A young woman pursuing ambitions in one of the most competitive industries in the world. The years following her death could not change that. Nor could legal debates. For her family, memories of Juliana undoubtedly extend far beyond the circumstances of the murder. They remember conversations, birthdays, shared experiences, moments that never appeared in court records. Moments that belong only to those who knew her. Those memories represent a different kind of truth. A truth existing independently of investigations and verdicts. And perhaps that truth matters most. Because while the criminal justice system seeks accountability, families often seek something deeper. Recognition. Remembrance. Assurance that the victim's life carried meaning. As public attention gradually shifted toward newer cases, Juliana's murder entered a different phase. No longer a current investigation dominating headlines. No longer an active courtroom battle. Instead, it became part of California's collection of unresolved criminal mysteries. One of those cases periodically rediscovered by new generations of researchers, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts. Each rediscovery brings renewed examination, new discussions, new theories. Yet the core facts remain unchanged. A young woman was murdered in Santa Monica. Evidence led investigators toward specific suspects. A trial followed. The accused was acquitted. And the fundamental question survived every stage of the process. What truly happened? Perhaps that question explains why the case continues to endure. Human beings dislike uncertainty. We prefer endings. We prefer conclusions. We prefer stories where every loose thread is tied together neatly. Juliana Redding's story refuses to offer that comfort. The final chapter remains incomplete. The mystery remains open. The debate remains active. And somewhere between the evidence, the courtroom arguments, the unanswered questions, and the memories left behind by those who loved her, the case continues to occupy a unique place in California criminal history. Not because it produced certainty, but because it did not. Years have passed since the violence that ended Juliana's life. The city around her apartment has continued changing. Businesses have opened and closed. Residents have come and gone. New dreams have arrived in Santa Monica. New stories have begun. Yet the questions surrounding March 2008 remain remarkably persistent. Time has softened some details, but it has not erased them. And until the mystery, at the center of the case, is answered in a way that satisfies both law and truth, the story of Juliana Redding will remain what it has been for years now. A tragedy. A controversy. A cautionary tale. And one of the most debated unsolved homicide mysteries of modern California.